All right, quick heads up here. This is not investment advice. This is just information to get you thinking. Do your own homework, talk to your own advisors, and make sure this kind of deal makes sense for you. We're here to share ideas, not tell you what to do. Cool? Okay, cool. Today's guest is the digital detective your website never knew it needed. From setting up analytics in WordPress to decoding the mystery behind where these leads are coming from, Joshua Lauer has spent a decade helping businesses track, measure, and actually understand what's working online and what's just a shiny button that nobody's clicking. We talk Google Analytics, pixel problems, navigation traps, and surprising truths about SEO in 2025. If you've ever wondered why your site isn't converting or even why it's not even being seen, this episode is your roadmap. Let's dive into the data with the guy who turns tracking chaos into crystal clear clarity.
The place was more of a WordPress slash Ruby on Rails shop.
Yep.
And they had a digital marketing team. And there was probably about 4 of us on that team most of the time, give or take, depending on the year. And every single project that came in for a website build during that time, I became like the default guy in house that was setting it up for analytics tracking and technical SEO, and then any kind of pixels that needed to be firing for any ad platforms. And so that was really how I got to start. And after, what I really liked about that too was just like there's a variety of projects. So you're like, this one, they do it like this. They care about a form submission. This one over here is more like e-commerce. This other one's maybe booking tables at a restaurant, depending on the account, right? So it's just a wide variety of clients and what do they want to do and how do they want to structure their site? How do they think about it? It was quite fascinating. We'd get like the analytics access when we were first starting off with a project, and I'd sit in a room with a designer and kind of look at the data, and the designer would, instead of just designing freely, they would get on a whiteboard and say, what if we did something like this? And I'd punch in analytics and see if I could find any data that supports that that's a good idea. Or is it like, oh, if you take this away, we're going to take this out of the top section and nobody's going to click on it. And so that's ask the client if that part of the site's important or not. There was usually talks like, when you have a new website, like what are the main things? Obviously, a lot of times people are like, it just needs to look modern. Like it looks old, so we want it to be fresh. But alongside that, let's talk about your current setup. What has been working? What hasn't been working? Do you wish that you were getting, most people do probably, who wouldn't wish they were getting more leads or more transactions or whatever.
Yeah.
But what are the things that are like, we can't lose anything here? And then is there anything else you'd like to get more of? Lots of cool conversations, lots of exposure to different ideas. And then probably from about 2016 to I guess 2022 is when I started going full-time freelance here. So in that time frame, I went in-house for a lot of different companies. I worked for Lead Pages. They had acquired a company called Drip, which is an email marketing automation tool. And then from there, I went to Evereve, which is a women's fashion retailer that has over 100 locations in the United States. And then Telesign after that, which is a company that does, if you've ever had a 6-digit code sent to your phone that you need to prove it's you. And then I was at another place called Skill Success, which is like a Netflix for e-learning courses. And
Okay, cool. So when you were going through those processes, especially when you're dealing with the developer and with the client and that, how often would companies not know what's working and what is working? Was there a time where it seemed like a lot of people didn't really understand, or did people understand that this is working, we want to keep this? Or talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that could be something where a lot of people might not necessarily understand where things are coming from.
Yes, it really was not uncommon for people to be like, I have no idea what's going on in Google Analytics, but here's what our financials say. So we're in a good spot financially, but we don't know why or how or where this is coming from. And so that was really a common thing. We would, in Google Analytics, there used to be a next page report. There's a way to build this today in GA4 if you use Looker. I don't know that I found the actual standard report, but in the sort of previous version of Google Analytics, you could say, I want to see all the pages people go to after the homepage. And it would show you like the top, however many, up to a certain number. You could probably look at 500, but that would be a lot. So we would look at maybe the top 30, depending on the size of the site. But so, in fact, a lot of times what I would do is I'd get the total number of page views that come after the homepage, and then take the number that went to each given page and get a percentage of, after viewing the homepage, 25% of the next page is maybe your contact page. Probably not, just as an example, or the About Us page, to use super generic pages. If we're talking about an e-commerce site, it might be you go to the homepage, you click the hero thing, and that takes you to a what's the word I'm looking for? Curated kind of collection of whatever's being promoted there in that respect. So we'd find ways to make sense out of that data, tell them the story that we're seeing, and say, does that sound right to you? The reason for that question is there's any number of things that can go wrong or double track or whatever. And occasionally you'd throw something at someone and they'd be like, what? No, that can't be. And then we uncovered that there was a weird tracking issue. So we had to like account for that and correct the reports we were pulling in order to right size it.
Got it. So it's not uncommon for a lot of people to not necessarily understand where people are at on their page. And as you're going through this, you're tracking on a page by page basis to figure out where the majority of people are going, and are they leaving on this page, what have you. What would be your process for making that better? You could see where people were going. Would it be like 90% of the traffic is going to this page and then leaving? Let's try to change that page up. And again, maybe through using your designers, making it more aesthetically pleasing and just better function on that page. Was that the main process that you'd use to be able to make these pages more effective or these websites more effective?
Yeah, sometimes it would be that. Sometimes, say we have that list of the pages you were looking at, and then we look at your website the way it looks today, and you've got like a navigation. And within that navigation, you can see from, say, left to right, or if it's on the left side, top to bottom. The hamburger menu was not super prevalent yet. And so I actually remember like a pretty interesting deep dive into the question about icons and whether or not somebody knows that the 3 lines in a hamburger menu actually mean that there's
more content. Yeah.
And for a while, surveys and studies were showing that people didn't know what it was. I think by now it's been around long enough that everyone knows what to expect there. But so if we saw a page that was high in the next page report, but it wasn't in the main navigation, that's an opportunity to ask, should we promote that? Since it seems like people are finding a way there somehow. Potentially that could have been featured throughout the homepage. And so maybe they just want to use the feature. They don't want to use the main nav. Eventually this led to a new tracking skill, which was I started finding ways to track how people interact with the navigation. And then of course, as sites got better and we started getting mobile sites, then there was like, sometimes if you want to track the nav, the main website, the desktop version is a lot different than the mobile version. So we'd have pull reports on how does it look from a desktop perspective? How does it look from a mobile perspective? And try to understand if there's any use cases that make more sense in one experience versus the other. A lot of times, depending on the budget, they're probably not looking for different nav treatments necessarily. But if it makes sense, think about a restaurant. Like you pull up their site, like probably one of the first things you want to potentially do are find out the hours, the address, if you haven't been there before, and whether or not you can make a reservation. So having those kinds of things right up front would be a lot more important.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. When you are laying this all out, you mentioned before how you worked for a shop that was mainly WordPress and Ruby. What are the languages today? What are the platforms today that are better, easier, maybe even more effective from a website standpoint? Obviously, I'm sure WordPress is still the 90-pound gorilla, I would say. Things like Go High Level and all of those types of things, Wix, all of those. What would be your suggestion for somebody who's looking to create a new site or maybe modify their website? What types of platforms should they be looking at, or does it not even matter?
I would say it depends on what you're doing. So let's say like WordPress versus Wix or Squarespace as an example. Like obviously you can go to WordPress.com and sign up for the site right there, and they'll take care of the hosting for you. But there is obviously the open source version of it where you can then host it yourself and deal with that if that's what you want to do. I think probably 15 years ago or so, it was more common to want to have your own kind of thing. I think most people have forgotten MySpace. Facebook came around and took over, but there was this kind of mentality and kind of using the band world as an example. Like your band has a MySpace page, but maybe you should have a website, right? Because what happens if MySpace goes under? Of course, nobody thought it was going to disappear at that point. So hosting it yourself, you control it. There's a variety of different advantages to that, but like something like a Squarespace or a Wix, if you don't want to be drowning in technical debt all day, they have some pretty nice features, and not just talking about design templates, but also like tracking features built in, SEO kind of stuff built in there. And in my experience today, a lot of e-commerce used to be more spread out. Now I find most sites are using Shopify in my experience. I've seen there was another, I think it was called Webflow, was a tool that I had worked with for a sort of easier to manage than WordPress kind of situation. And I would describe it like if Photoshop became a web design tool that lives in the cloud, where you could just, so if you're the designer and you don't have a developer and you're like, I designed this, I have the same sort of tool set, very similar tool set in Webflow.
Interesting. Yeah. So what are some of the common things that people can do to be able to help them be able to track better and have their website perform better? Is there a list of things that you go through when you're looking at websites of we need to do this, we need to do that? Like, what is this step-by-step process that you would say that people should be deploying to be able to make their website work and function better?
Yeah, there's probably, 30 to 50 different things that I'd check for on a website. I'll typically run a crawl tool, I use Screaming Frog a lot, but also Ahrefs is a great tool if you don't want to run.
What was that trust?
Ahrefs. So Ahrefs.com.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So I think it usually gets pronounced as Ahrefs, like the A is like silent to an extent. But for the geeks out there, if you're making a link on a website, it's an anchor tag. So that's what the A is. And then href equals, and then you put the link in. So Ahref is a kind of sneaky way to say all the links.
Got it.
And so with those tools, we can look at various technical, how is the website built? Do you have any broken internal links? Are you using keywords throughout the site? So if we're talking like the technical sort of SEO optimization side of it, a variety of things. If we're getting into the tracking part of it, usually the way that I would break that down is by getting access to the analytics account. And then we know what the site is. So we can look at that. We can look in analytics and see what we're seeing there. And so within analytics, there's a traffic acquisition report. There's also a landing page report. And so those are some of the first two reports that I'll look at. And the traffic acquisition is just saying, we know that people came from either Facebook organic or Facebook ads, Google organic, Google ads, LinkedIn, whatever kind of place you might be buying traffic from, organic search, direct traffic, referral traffic. So it just breaks down the traffic into a bunch of buckets. But from there, it'll aggregate to how many sessions came from each of these groups. And once you get the goals set up, and I guess that's a good point for the sort of audit question there, like maybe you don't have goals set up. It's not uncommon to actually get to this point where we know we have traffic and we can see where it's coming from, but like the goals weren't configured properly, or they're not tracking at all. Or maybe somebody tried to get something tracking and they think that it's like double or triple counting. That goes back to that question of, hey, in your analytics account, we're seeing this activity. Does that sound like what you're seeing? Like when you're like talking to various leads, looking at the business data, are you getting this many per week in terms of leads or transactions, whatever it happens to be that you're tracking? And usually if people have a pretty good idea of what their KPIs are at any given company, or if it's your own business, you're going to be pretty closely watching that stuff, right? So right away, people are, if I throw a number at you, you're like, yeah, that sounds right. Or no, that's totally not right. And if we get to that totally not right version, a lot of times that comes along with somebody then explaining, we had this guy working on the website. He was a developer mostly, and he set it up to work like this, or we're going to get all these stories about how it got to be how it is today. But really, there's another kind of thing that can mess with those numbers too, which goes back to earlier versions of Google Analytics, which were that like most of the goals fired on a thank you page. Like let's say you have a lead form. After they submit the form, we take you to a page that says, thanks for your interest, someone will follow up. Or even if you have a e-commerce site, you purchase the thing, it's thanks for your order, here's the order details, here's your tracking number. So a thank you page seemed like a great kind of solution, but let's just say, okay, we hit the thank you page and we fire that as a lead form. And then that person leaves that tab open and they come back to the site later on because they're trying to remember, what was that again? Maybe they refresh the page and now we've got like an artificial sort of, that little guy at the door counting everyone that goes through is, oh, we're going to count another one, even though that guy already, or that person already
was counted. Yeah.
So there were some things Google Analytics would do, like they would count uniques, right? So if we have a cookie identifier and we know that we counted one for that cookie and then we counted two, so we'd have two total goals and one unique goal. So if we counted the unique goals, that was get around it. But really that was not, still had sort of some problems with it. Google Analytics today is completely event-based. And so we can do things like when the form submits, we can say, we know that the form just submitted, and now we're going to say we have a form submission event. And it doesn't matter if they go to the thank you page and refresh it 500 times, like we counted that form submission one time. And with e-commerce site, we track the moment that the transaction actually happens, and coordinating with developers, we get details about what items were being purchased when that transaction went through, what was the total amount for, what was the tax, the shipping, all that kind of stuff. So now we can go back to the acquisition report and look at the forms that were submitted or the transactions that came through with revenue. And now we can see, oh, organic search drove 500 purchases last week or something for X amount of money. And so now you've got, okay, the channels are performing a little better. What about this landing page report? So the landing page would be like when you come to a website, the very first page that you see. And by the time you're no longer on the website, have you done the thing we wanted you to do yet? We could say when people come to the homepage, we're seeing a 2% conversion rate to transaction, for example. Or maybe we have a different page that was a category page that we know there's high search volume for. So we're interested in whatever that category page is. And is that doing well from an organic search perspective at driving transactions or what have you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, how effective is SEO today? Do you see, and when I'm saying SEO, I'm organic SEO, where you've got all the keywords and you're trying to optimize for specific keywords rather than just buying traffic. In your opinion, what is the best approach? Is it taking this and going after your keywords and your long tail keywords and going that path, going down an organic path, or is it best just to buy the traffic? And I feel like there's probably a short and a long answer there. If you're in this for the long haul, you want to own those keywords essentially. But if you're looking for quick traffic, then it's best to just buy it. I'm just curious your perspective on that, because I've heard different people over the years say, I don't even bother with SEO anymore. We just buy all the traffic, and they don't even get into any of that. I'm just curious from your perspective, how effective SEO is today.
Yeah, I think for sure it depends on your industry. I remember one of the kind of first like deep dive data things that I did for a client. They felt that if they're paying for keywords, they're cannibalizing their organic search results. And of course, they're like, if I'm getting this traffic for free, why would I start paying for it? And we got in there and did a deep dive analysis to try to understand, like, are the people clicking the ads within Google Ads or search results the same people as who clicks organic search? And at least at that point in time, and with that account, like, they were definitely two different groups. And so that was an interesting thing. There's a person that'll click the ad, and there's a person that sees the ad and says, no, I don't want to go to the thing where they're trying to trick me.
Yeah.
Some people feel like ads are foolish or trying to fool them or trick them into clicking on something. I'm sure I definitely remember a time before I knew as much as I know about how these things work, where I think a friend's router was like acting up, and I like Googled like that brand, and I ended up clicking on an ad without realizing it. And somebody was trying to sell me some kind of support package for this router thing. All of a sudden I was like, no, I was just trying to figure this out. So now if you get, on the other hand, where you said some people are like, we don't want to deal with the optimization side of it, we're just going to buy the traffic. Okay, cool. Let's do that. If that works for you, you got the cash flow and the leads are coming through. But if we shut those ad campaigns off, what happens to your business? And of course, if the cash flow is in a place where it doesn't matter, we don't have to explore that question. But certainly the way that Google Ads works, it is a search tool. So the same kind of quality signals that give you a better quality score in Google Ads, if you're optimizing your site for a better ad experience, you're also potentially optimizing for a better organic search experience to an extent. There's a lot of ways that could be different, but let's just say that it's a more cohesive scenario. So if you're optimizing your site from an organic search perspective, you've done probably some keyword research as far as if no one had ever heard of my company, my business, my brand, and what we do, what do I think they'd type in to find us? And so you come up with all these lists. And then of course you could go to a tool. Google used to have the keyword planner tool, which I think they've sunsetted, or at least you have to spend a lot of money within Google Ads to be able to see some of that stuff. So a tool like Ahrefs gives us search volume estimates that are pretty reliable. And so it's not uncommon for you to be like, oh, this is perfect. And then you go run it through a tool like that and you're like, oh, we get 10 searches a month. And you might go, doesn't sound like enough. But I think there's some things where like 10 searches a month is still better than, and depending on your business, like if you're able to rank for that keyword and you have exactly what that person wants or what those 10 people want, you're probably going to have a pretty high response rate when they get to the website. I don't know if I would recommend optimizing for something with 10 searches per month. It depends on really what the business is and how high the potential is. But again, if you optimize for something, it doesn't cost you anything to do that. And so if you start getting traffic because of that's a great thing. And I think along those lines, when it comes to keyword research, you mentioned long tail, right? And there are different strategies you can take within the website to have like internal linking, where you're making the relevant concepts and the relevant pages link to each other. And it communicates a structure to the web crawlers of how this content's related. And along those lines, if you're then linking out to other websites, it sounds counterintuitive, but you can establish a relationship with another site just by linking to it. And then that establishes another kind of like semantic relevance, if that makes sense.
Yeah. When you are picking out your keywords, how do you go about finding that most effective path? Like you mentioned, like the 10 keyword search, a lot of people are going to say, I'm not going to bother with something that small. Is there a way that you should be approaching this? Because there's the other end of that too, where maybe you see something that's getting 30,000 searches a month, but obviously everybody's going to be competing for that particular keyword. So then that's going to take a hell of a long time and a lot of more money and effort to be able to rank for that particular keyword. So is there like a sort of a sweet spot, I guess you can say, where, these are easier to be able to rank for and doable? Or like, how do you go about identifying which should be and should not be gone after from the SEO standpoint?
Yeah. So again, Ahrefs, this is turning into a total plug for Ahrefs, but they have a feature called like clicks per search. So now you've got the search volume, but then based off of however they're coming up with their data, they estimate out of those searches how many people actually click. And that's like relevant because you have all sorts of like snippets all over the place. People also ask, where you open up this thing, now you've got the AI overview, you've got like off to the side, like the organization snippet. And so like there's a lot of searches where people do the search and then they don't end up clicking through to your site. So now, is that to say that like ranking in those different spots is not a good idea? No, because anytime you see those brand placements, it's a place where the brand is being recognized. But on the flip side, if it's not amounting to traffic coming to the site, it feels hard to like prioritize it. So that's where within a keyword research, there will be, competition, as you mentioned, which is usually actually representative of the competition in Google Ads or like in the ad platforms, but it still gives you a sense of like how many people are going after this. So we get the clicks per search, the estimated search volume, and then you can narrow it down from there. And then there's this like people also search for or similar searches or parent topics that can all be unleashed with an Ahrefs. But also, anytime you think you have a good keyword, you should just actually go search for it in Google and then see, does this look like the kind of results I would expect to see? If do I belong with all these other sites here? I think it's surprising how often you might, here's an example, going back to the two-factor authentication codes, right? Let's say you're trying to sell that service to a company. So 2FA, multi-factor authentication, what have you. And if you look at search, what happens a lot, which is not a surprise, is somebody signs into something and it's enter your code.
Yeah.
And they're like, what code? It hasn't come to them yet. So they go to Google and they're like, I can't find my code. Where's my, what's it called? 2FA code. And so that's a great example of like the people searching for a 2FA code in that respect are definitely confused. They're not the people that are going to try to implement that at their company typically. So there's nuances to how then you add modifiers to those things as far as enable two-factor authentication. Even enabling it though is something that you can choose to do on your account or not. So it becomes a tricky, very nuanced. You don't know what you don't know about a subject until you see what people search for as it relates to what you think they would be searching for. And so you learn a lot as you're coming up with these lists and trying to figure out what to go after and what to prioritize.
And tell us a little bit about how AI has changed all of this. You have the new-ish, probably within the last year-ish or so, maybe, the new results that Google does the AI generation for first, and then all of the ads filter in below that. And then finally below that, then you have the organic search results. So talk a little bit about, did that change anything, change any of the approach with how you go about doing any of this? Or that's something that I really haven't had very much experience with at all. I'm not quite sure how that changed the game at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. Specifically for how I like to approach things, I haven't seen a dramatic difference in terms of how we start breaking it down. In my experience, when looking at the search snippets, I think they're still very hit or miss. So like there are times where I'll see a search snippet in response to a query I placed, and I'm like, just the other day, I was looking for a keyboard shortcut in a music program, and the search snippet came up and said, do these things, and they use this keyboard shortcut, but I knew that shortcut was wrong. So I was like, this is not the shortcut for this. And I had to, you can open it up and there's a link that you can surface and get to the site. So there's still a way to get to the site. And I think along those lines, this gets towards, if you think about making a comprehensive FAQ page, right? That may or may not be like the best place to do it. Certainly an approach, as far as we have every question we can think of that people usually want to ask us, and here are our answers. But if you're more on the content side of strategizing, maybe it makes sense to actually have that question within a piece of content where you can go much more in depth than just providing a dictionary definition. And that comes down to, again, looking at that AI overview, but then looking at the rest of the organic search results and trying to understand, like, how are they addressing this query? And if you make it into a lot of times too, the AI overviews, they might just be summarizing what you're getting from the first 5 results. And if you don't go click through those results, you might not realize that. But if you do look at the overview and then go to check out the results, you'll see, oh, this is basically summarizing the search results. And like your mileage may vary depending on what's going on. I think as far as understanding intent, I don't think anyone's really beating ChatGPT at this point in time. And I specifically haven't really dabbled in optimizing anything for ChatGPT myself. I've mostly just used it in terms of I needed to come up with a bio when I started working
Yeah.
on this podcast stuff. And I think if there's one subject that's hard to write about, it's yourself. So I asked ChatGPT to come up with 250 words describing me, and I was amazed.
Yeah. I'm sure it probably did a great job. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you go down this path, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, how do you know if doing SEO research and tracking and all of that should be something that you should have in your handled with your website? And how do you know if it's not handled? I guess that's the main question. Obviously, plenty of companies have websites out there, but they may not necessarily even know whether or not they have a problem. So how do they identify whether or not they have a problem or not? Is there any type of research or anything that they can do to do self-check, if you will?
Yeah. So a big one is if you're not showing up for your own brand name, right? Like that's a problem. And a pretty serious one. Potentially somebody's coming to your office to meet with you and they're like, I tried to search for you and I couldn't find you. That's a big red flag. That's a pretty common one to hear. And it's obviously a lot different. It should be really easy to rank for your brand name because that's your brand. And so if you're not, that implies there's some serious technical issues that we need to resolve. There's very easy mistakes that people can make with trying to tell the crawlers what they can and cannot access, and they accidentally make it so they're saying you can't access any of this. And so there's like really easy things, or like maybe the site was set to no index when they were like in a dev state and they went live with it and they forgot to change that setting. So there's things like that can happen. I think also like any business that's like looking to optimize, right? The business is around, it's functioning. You talk to your customers, you get a sense of like, where did you hear from us or hear about us rather? And was it like something where they just entered a search, or was it like they heard about you on a podcast, or did they see you in a social feed somewhere? So you can get a sense of, if we know that like search, even paid search, if we know that's coming up as a theme for how people found you, then that's definitely like a channel that you should try to dig into and optimize more. If it, on the other hand, it's, oh, like every single person found you on LinkedIn or Instagram or something, like, then that's probably where you want to focus your time, depending on where you're at and how much you're trying to scale. Because you've got so much time and so many things you can do in any given point. And so I think that's, again, going back to Google Analytics, that's where seeing that traffic attribution sort of channel report and which channels are driving the most activity, that kind of gives you a sense of what should we focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. How important is the domain name? You mentioned a few minutes ago about how you should be ranking for whatever your brand is. And you would think that you would have your, whatever the name of your company is, you would think that you would have that.com. But obviously that's getting more and more difficult to be able to rank for those types of things. I guess two questions there. How important is having the .com version of whatever your name is? And then is there a hierarchy of the other extensions of what, you should be looking at? It used to be .com was best, then .net, and maybe .org, potentially, maybe, at least that's the way that I understood it. And then, anything after that used to be not worthwhile having. But how does that all change today?
I think today .com, it still stands for commercial site, right? So it's important to an extent. That being said, like, if you're driving this activity and people are finding your site and you're doing what you do, there's a natural process where links will get built and point to your domain. There used to be like a more drive to find like exact match domains, so that if they didn't know who you were, like 123easykeywords.com or something like that, that kind of stuff doesn't fly as well. So if your domain had the keyword and it used to just automatically help you to rank better. But today is certainly a site that's much higher quality than like an exact match domain that has more of a reputation, that's been around for a while, that has other sites linking to it, it's gonna perform a lot better than that exact match domain.
Got it. So it doesn't sound like it's as important as what it used to be.
Yeah, I don't really think so. There's more top level domains that are being unlocked all the time. And really, it's, if you're out there building your business and you're not just trying to game the system, like, you're going to have natural things, natural signals indicating that this is a legit site. And so again, like that internal linking can establish sort of the relevance of different pieces of content internally as far as like our services, our products, what have you. And then when you link out to other websites that are related on the subject or potentially even competitors, like that establishes you as sort of part of that network of topics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We're getting up about on time here. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you think people should know about doing keyword research, tracking, all of that type of stuff? Is there anything that comes to mind that is a frequently asked question or a frequent problem that you've seen in a lot of people's builds?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it's really easy to look at what you've done and have a critical eye about it, right? Oh, this site is no good. It's especially if you're like building a new site, you're making something new. There's this get the dirty laundry out of here and start fresh. But that's not always the right strategy. So before you go removing all sorts of pages and saying we don't need this or we don't need that, or even all these URLs are going to change with the new website, it's really important to understand in your current site, are there any pages that actually have a lot of backlinks and have a lot of organic traffic? And so as you're navigating that, you really want to preserve the URLs. So it's kind of like when you choose a path and you go out there into the world and you're taking that path, stick with it. If you go 5 miles this way and then go, oh, this is completely the wrong direction, there's a scenario where it might actually be the wrong direction. And certainly you're going to have to course correct in that scenario. But there's also, it's where it's working. It's not perfect, but the amount of history we've established here matters enough that we need to stay the course. And we might want to add a new page in that covers a different angle, but just be careful when getting rid of things because you think they were old or not. A lot of times you can update an old piece of content, and that's potentially a more like solid, low-hanging fruit solution than just like wiping it out completely and starting with a brand new URL.
Yeah. And when you're saying update a piece of content, is the idea where, like how much can you change that page? If it's already got good traffic coming to it, I understand getting rid of it, then the traffic goes away. But if you change it too much, then you might end up screwing up the traffic coming to it as well. You might change the way that particular page is being viewed. Is that correct?
That's certainly possible. So yeah, and that's a great kind of nuance too from a tracking perspective. So we made this change on this day, whether it's 20 new paragraphs or we just changed the title of the page, whatever that changes, we're going to annotate this happened on this day. And then we're looking at the traffic reports. If we see organic search fell off a cliff like 3 days after that, is a good sign that maybe we should revert back to how it was before. So it's always nice to be able to keep a copy of things in case you need to go backwards.
Yeah.
That can be something that's iterative. You might make an update on one piece of content and all of a sudden it starts performing really well. And you're like, okay, so on that one, I did these 5 things. I'm going to do those 5 things to this other one. And then that page tanks. So you just have to see what happens and go from there and be willing to look at that data and change course on what your perspective was, depending on whether or not the data was telling you that it was a good change or not.
Yeah. Is there any kind of a timeline too? Like you mentioned, if you're tracking your changes and 3 days later, the traffic tanks, if you revert that back to the way that you used to have it, does that mean that 3 days later, the traffic should be back again? Or could you screw yourself up where it might take weeks, months to be able to get that same amount of traffic back? How does that work?
Yeah, the 3 days is probably a ridiculously quick number there. But hypothetically, if you saw that dramatic of a change, I would definitely try to change back as quick as possible. I would think it would pretty dramatically go back to how it was. You can go to Google Search Console and request indexing if you make a change, if you feel like it's not seeing it. But yeah, it gets into a question about crawl quota, right? So we're crawling the entire internet. How many resources are we dedicating to your website? And some of that has to do with like, how much traffic does it get, like based off of, what Google probably knows from all the people that use Google Chrome. And is it that it gets a lot of traffic, so it's updated and crawled regularly? Or is it like the page authority might be lower, so it only gets crawled once a month? if you're really doing something that's more well thought out and you're digging deep and trying to like put the best possible content out there and you really believe in it, I'd be hesitant to revert something too fast. So if you've given it 3 to 6 months, you probably have a better understanding there. There's also studies out there that suggest that some of the best content in terms of high ranking content in Google was around for a year before it really got to that top spot. Again, within Ahrefs, as you're doing your keyword research, you can see how like the sort of SERPs, search engine result pages, fluctuate. If there's a lot of noise there, it might be a time for you to jump in and like take over that, because Google's not really sure what people are looking for. On the flip side, if it looks like it's just been steady, these 5 sites have ranked for as long as you can see back in the time frame that you're looking at, it might be a sign that it's going to be harder to crack into that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Joshua, this is, again, this is one of those topics that I feel like changes, and then there's more questions with the changes. And really, the only way to really know what's working, what's not working, I feel, is to be in it and doing it on a day-to-day basis. Having your 13 years of experience in there and playing with these things is pretty valuable. So if people want to learn more about you or reach out and get in touch, what would be the best way to do that?
I would say find me on LinkedIn. You can search for Joshua Lauer. I should pop up there with a photo that's probably about 15 years old from a guy that looks like he's attending a wedding. And if you just want to send me a message with the words deep dive audit, I'll make sure to get back to you and set up a time to have a chat about how we can help you improve your business.
Beautiful. Joshua, thank you so much for the time, and hopefully this will, I'm sure this is going to help a lot of people, because again, this is one of those topics that everybody always has questions about. So certainly appreciate your input.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If your idea of website analytics is checking if your homepage still loads, then this episode just saved your marketing strategy. Huge thanks to Joshua Lauer for showing us how to stop flying blind and start making decisions with data that actually matters. And hey, if you're still lost in the sauce of Google Analytics or wondering if your site is secretly sabotaging your sales, reach out to Josh on LinkedIn and drop the words deep dive audit. He'll know what to do. Until next time, stay curious, stay clever, and keep investing in what works.